Over the past several days, there's been a major development in Austria revolving around the formation of a government, and that is that the coalition talks between the People's Party and the various other parties, excluding the Freedom Party, have collapsed, and that the incumbent Chancellor Karl Nehammer from the Austrian People's Party has resigned. And what this means is this is opening up a path for Herbert Kickl and the Freedom Party, which won the elections back in September 2024, to form a government and have potentially Herbert Kickl become Austria's next chancellor. This would be the first time that the Freedom Party would be leading a coalition government, but the third time, if they form a coalition, third time in government overall. The Freedom Party was in power in the late 90s. They came into power from 1999 to 2002 with Jörg Haider as their chair and then Susanne Reispasa as their vice chancellor as a junior partner under the People's Party. And then from 2017 until 2019, Heinz Christian Strache was the vice chancellor in a coalition also under the Austrian People's Party. This would be the first time, if the coalition is formed under the Freedom Party, that they would be the lead, the senior partner, and running the government. Of course, it is not certain, but this does make the path much more clear. Now, we could also see new elections. That's why I want to take a look at the polls. But the most likely outcome as of now, I would say, is probably going to be a coalition talks between Herbert Kickl's Freedom Party and most likely the People's Party. There are some people in the People's Party that are against working with the Freedom Party. There are others that are okay with working with them. Some people have kind of changed their mind after these recent developments. And so we'll have to see what happens as of after the coalition talks. But I would expect the Freedom Party and the People's Party to hold talks. If they succeed, we could see a coalition. If not, we could potentially see coalition talks. It is possible for the Freedom Party and the Social Democrats to form a coalition. It's very unlikely. However, there have been talks and there have been governments, at least on state level, between the Freedom Party and the Social Democrats. Under the current leadership of the Social Democrats, I would say that's very unlikely, but it's not unprecedented. It shouldn't be ruled out 100% because there has been talks, there has been cooperation between the SPO and the SPO and the FPO before, so it's not unprecedented, but I would say the most likely coalition would be the Freedom Party and the Austrian People's Party. Now, first I want to give a recap of the results we had back in September of 2024. These were the legislative elections for Austria's parliament, which would determine, of course, its parliament itself and, of course, the future government. Now, the former coalition was a coalition of the Austrian People's Party and the Greens. The People's Party won a big electoral victory in 2019 at the snap elections following a scandal that brought down the government. A lot of voters went away from the Freedom Party to the Austrian People's Party, and they were able to win, I believe, around 37% of the vote. And so in this election, they dropped around 10 points, dropping from a strong first place of around 37% to 26%. They were still able to be second place. They were still able to be competitive with the Freedom Party in a lot of areas, winning a lot of states. And this was the reason why they attempted to form a coalition, is they did not believe the Freedom Party was ready or was proper for forming a government and having Herbert Kickl become chancellor. And so even though they didn't win, they had enough votes to kind of have a mandate working with other parties to form a coalition. But since those talks have failed, we can now see that the Freedom Party, which won first place, is the next in prior position, and the only other party that can realistically form a government. The Social Democrats do not have a majority with the Greens or the Liberals, and even if they did a three-way coalition, I mean, it would be somewhat unstable with such a small majority if they were to have one. And so the likely coalition, and the likely options now is either the Freedom Party forms a coalition or we have snap elections. Now the results was, of course, a defeat for the People's Party, but they were able to hold on, to a significant, a decent amount of support to stay competitive. The victory, it was a huge victory for the Freedom Party, which won for the first time. They won at the EU elections earlier that year in June of 2024. But this was the first time they came first place nationwide as well, and were able to win in 4 of these states. And the Social Democrats were very stagnant here. They won around 21% of the vote. Not many changes. There was a lot of problems with the leadership, a lot of divide within the party, and so they were very stagnant. And considering they were in the opposition, this is somewhat of a disappointing result for them. And so we can see here with these numbers, Austria, of course, elects its parliament proportionally. This is pretty much in line with the composition of the Austrian parliament. And so if there was a coalition between the Freedom Party and the People's Party, we would have a broad right-wing government. They would have a decent-sized majority, with Freedom Party having slightly more, so they would probably get 1 or 2 more ministers, and of course the chancellor position. But it would be kind of evenly divided. The People's Party would also have claim for a lot of government ministers, but of course they don't want to get too far because the coalition talks are definitely not really started or definitely not finalized. So we still have a long time until then. But in case there is a snap election, I do want to look at the polls, and I actually think that the polls are one reason why a snap election is most likely not going to happen. And that is after the People's Party made the decision to kind of exclude the Freedom Party and kind of form, have coalition talks to try and form a government. Their polling numbers have suffered significantly, and the Austrian Freedom Parties has risen by a large margin. And we can see the results was a 2-point lead for the Freedom Party. The last poll that came out in this year, a few days ago, put the Freedom Party at 37%, almost 10 points ahead of what they got in the last election. That would have been a 20-point gain from around the 2019 result. So 37%, that is moving them, from a margin of only 2 to well over a margin of around 16 points. And the Freedom Party would be gaining up 10 from the last election, and the People's Party would be losing around 5. And so we can see with this result, if there were snap elections were to be held and these would be the results, the Freedom Party would be in such a strong position that there could really be no other government formed without them, and the People's Party would have to end up forming a coalition with them. But of course, with this result, they would have less leverage to get the ministers and positions in the cabinet that they wanted. And so I think the People's Party, even though they might not be 100% on board with working with the Freedom Party, they probably want to form a coalition now rather than have snap elections where the Freedom Party will have much more leverage winning in a big landslide victory. And even the polls prior to 2025 showed that this was the case. The People's Party was down at 20% in some, and the Freedom Party was at around at least 35, a floor of 35, with some polls having around 37. And then the Social Democrats are still stagnant, losing around another point. So in a very poor position. There were scandals affecting the People's Party and the Freedom Party over the past several years, and the Social Democrats have not really been able to monopolize, to win anything off of those and been able to assert themselves, and so they are in a stagnant third place position. And so we will definitely have to see what happens. I suspect that the fear of a huge landslide victory for the Freedom Party will keep the People's Party from calling snap elections or from refusing to work with the Freedom Party. So I would expect we to see some kind of coalition between the Freedom Party and the People's Party, which will be significant. But of course, the Freedom Party has never come to power in this way. They've never had a chancellor before, and so it will be unprecedented, and it will probably take time. And of course, I will cover it more as we get closer and once we get more developments on the coalition talks. But another factor that might have played into this was the state elections in Steiermark, which was a huge victory for the Freedom Party. This was held a couple months after the national elections, and this was kind of seen as a clear signal towards the federal parties at what the mood in Austria was. And basically what had happened is the Freedom Party had kind of been surging for a few years now. They had won the European elections, they won the national elections, and they were expected to do very well in Steiermark. However, after the refusal of some of the parties to work with the Freedom Party, they kind of started to gain, and they increased in their polls. And in Steiermark, they won a landslide victory, outperforming even their highest expectations in the polls, and won in this state, doubling the result from the last election, winning almost 35% of the vote, and defeating the incumbent incumbent Landeshauptmann from the state from the People's Party. And Mario Konisek has actually now become the governor. The Freedom Party in this state has formed a coalition with the People's Party, and that means that Mario Konisek is the first governor of a state since Jörg Haider was governor of the state of Carinthia in the south back in the late 90s and early 2000s. So a huge milestone for the party in this state, but also a milestone for the Freedom Party. And this did create pressure because a electoral defeat on the state level, this was expected to happen. The People's Party was expected to lose support, but arguably they lost even more because the coalition talks were being dragged out, and the exclusion of the Freedom Party did anger a lot of voters. And so we saw this result, and this result might have created the pressure for Nehammer and the collapse of the current coalition talks. And so arguably this result did play into it. But regardless of that, this is important because I haven't mentioned on this channel that there has been the formation of a government in the state, and that is that Mario Konisek has been elected the governor. So a huge victory for the Freedom Party in this state, and potentially for the national elections. We don't have the results yet, and like I said, the snap election is still possible. We could see someone else step in, maybe a coalition without the Freedom Party. Nothing is yet certain, but that is the situation, and that is the way the situation is now. And as we get closer, or as we get any more updates, I will for sure make a video on those. So that's going to be it for this video. I'll probably resume covering Germany in the next couple of days and probably do some more videos on them. And that's going to be it for this one. So if you If you do like, please like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thank you for watching.